Today's episode is all about the 2022 NHL Draft. We will take a look at three different prospects and talk about the possibility of them coming to Dallas and playing for the Stars. We'll take a look at the pros of their style of play, the cons of their style of play, and talk about their product that they offer as a player as a whole. We'll cover it all on today's episode of Locked On Stars.
You're Locked On Stars, your daily podcast on the Dallas Stars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Howdy, Stars fans. Welcome back to the Locked On Stars podcast, the only daily podcast covering the Dallas Stars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Dane Lewis, your local expert on all things Dallas Stars hockey, credentialed member of the Stars Media, coming to you on this Wednesday, July 6th. And whether this is your first time here or you are a recurring listener, thank you for stopping by today's episode and for making Locked On Stars your first listen of the day. Be sure to subscribe to our show on YouTube. The road to 500 subscribers continues. You can also follow us on your favorite podcasting platform, whether that's Spotify, Apple, you name it. We are free and available no matter where or how you listen. You can also find and follow me on Twitter at Dane_Lewis, as well as our show just at Locked On Stars. But let's get down to business on today's episode. We are hitting the ground running. It is NHL Draft week, and we've been talking a lot this offseason about the coaching change with Pete DeBoer, player evaluations, whether some players could be leaving, staying, UFAs, trade talks, but now it's time to fully dig in on the draft talk here with Locked On Stars. I know sometimes the NHL Draft can maybe be overlooked by hockey fans in the South in general, I feel like, but especially I've noticed with myself here in Dallas, that this is probably the closest I've paid attention to an NHL draft in my life, because now I cover this team and I'm interested to see what the future could look like, because you never know when you're going to find that next massive monumental franchise player in a draft. And this is a pretty top heavy draft, and it seems like the top 10 is pretty set in stone of at least who's going to get picked. The order is still obviously not going to be decided until draft night, but the Dallas Stars picking as of right now in round one with the 18th overall pick. And today we are going to take a look at three different prospects that they could either take with that pick or potentially in the second, third round, or even later on. You never know. But the first guy I want to talk about is a defenseman. All three of these players are defensemen. Tomorrow we will look at more prospects, maybe look at some more offensive pieces there. But today we're focusing on three defensemen. The first one, Lian Bichsel. This is a guy who was born in Switzerland. I believe if you listened to last week's episode with Sam Nessler, this is a guy that Sam briefly mentioned as a player that the Stars could pursue in this year's draft. So again, Lian Bichsel, born in Switzerland, but has played most recently in Sweden in order to play against better competition, more stiff competition that could get him more NHL ready, or at least ready to be drafted into the pros. And then who knows where he could play, whether it would be back in Sweden or maybe a junior club in Canada. The possibilities obviously kind of endless with that. But this is a guy who, at least size-wise, is very comparable to Jani Hakanpaa. He is 6'5", around 220 pounds. So an absolutely massive frame. Jani Hakanpaa, almost the exact same, 6'6", 220 pounds, according to NHL.com. And a guy like Bichsel is not going to be the flashiest pick. He's not necessarily that flashy, the sexy style defenseman, for lack of a better term, like your Cale Makars of the world. He's not going to be that guy that's going to just, play the lights out with the way that he handles the stick in the offensive zone. However, he does have some offensive upside. He has been noted as a playmaker, kind of a pass-first guy, a little bit more of a pure, quote-unquote, defenseman for today's modern NHL. So this is a guy that would come in and be a little bit more of an enforcer type, similar to what Jani Hakanpaa did with the Stars last season. Be the guy that is really in there to play, kind of just eat some minutes away, but also be that really aggressive enforcer on defense that can check people really well along the boards, but also use their long reach and big frame to disrupt plays and also help get the breakaway started whenever the Stars do get possession of the puck. So, he can pass the puck pretty well. Still needs a little bit of work on that. And of course, getting drafted by an NHL team, you get a little bit more access to development and things like that. So these are things that, and pretty much all of the quote unquote cons or negatives for these players are things that obviously they will continue to work on, but they're just some red flags to say, okay, if you take this player, they do a lot of things well, but here are some of the things that they don't do well. His physicality, obviously with that big frame is going to come quite a bit of physicality that can be used for checking along the boards or just checking in general, which is a good thing, but sometimes it can be a bad thing. I was reading up, I think at least one time he's been ejected for some hits, just some, I guess, unnecessary roughness type plays. And of course, officiating going to be different wherever you go across the globe. But it's just one of those things that he needs to learn to channel the physicality. There's a right time to use, your body to make a hit, and there's a time to kind of back off and just use it to make a block or make it difficult for someone to move around you. So not necessarily a negative, the physicality. If anything, that's a good thing. He just needs to learn how to channel it and use it properly, because when he's using it properly, he can disrupt plays and he can really get down the ice in a hurry just with that massive frame. He can take huge strides on the ice and move pretty well for a guy his size. I mean, it's hard to move at 6'5", 220 pounds on skates, but he does it quite well. Sam Cosentino of Sportsnet reports that, he's a really good defenseman, but still pretty raw offensively and still needs quite a bit of work, especially shooting the puck. He can shoot it very hard and has a really heavy shot. But as far as precision, aim, and the timing of those shots, that's something that he still needs to work on. And one of the other really big concerns, and it's not even that big of a concern because I don't think injuries have plagued him very much, but has dealt with a little bit of injury lately, which many people believe could cause his draft stock to fall. This is a guy that maybe without the injuries could be taken somewhere in the top 15 and very well still could go maybe in the top 15 picks of this upcoming draft. But there's also some people that think that he could fall to the middle to end of round 1, which is exactly where the Dallas Stars are, which could very realistically place him to be available at that 18th overall pick. Whether or not this is a guy that Jim Nill and the rest of the front office want would be, to be determined. This is a guy that is kind of one of those reach picks that there's clearly a ton of potential there with the size, the physicality, the playmaking ability, the ability to disrupt plays. And obviously, if you can shoot the puck hard, you just got to learn to channel that and be a good shooter. Those are things that can be worked on over time, but it's just a matter of how long would his leash be? How patient would you be with that development? Or would you rather, use your pick or resources elsewhere to get a different player or even perhaps trade that pick? So I'm going to be curious to see when a guy like Bichsel goes off the board. Could very well be before Dallas's pick at number 18, could be with the Stars, or could be near the end of the first round. I think he's a guy with a lot of upside and one of the more intriguing players that's set to go on night 1 of the NHL draft. So Lian Bichsel, remember his name and be on the lookout for him on night 1 of the draft on Thursday. Well, coming up next, we're going to take a look at our second prospect of the episode. We'll be talking about a kid out of Canada, Owen Pickering. More on him after a quick break. Today's episode of Locked On Stars is brought to you by our friends at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and more. And BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline.net, where the game starts. All right, we're moving right along on this midweek episode of Locked On Stars. Thank you again for making Locked On Stars your first listen of the day. We are continuing with our draft prospect analysis, previews, whatever you want to call it. We talked last segment about Lian Bichsel, and now we will be taking a look at the second prospect of the episode, Owen Pickering. This is a kid who was born in Manitoba, Canada, So maybe a little bit of speculation that he could be going to play for the Winnipeg Jets. But as we've seen with speculation and the Jets this offseason, things not always going in their favor. Wanted Barry Trotz, who was a Manitoba native, and it didn't happen. So we'll see where a guy like Pickering falls in the draft. He has played most recently in the Western Hockey League with the Swift Current Broncos. This is a 6'4", 180-pound defenseman. So he has that tall length and size, but definitely does not have the weight or bulk of a guy like Bichsel or Jani Hakanpaa, but still incredible upside from this guy. Tons of great things to be said about this kid from several draft experts, several draft previews and analysis, prospect reviews that I was able to find on this guy. Still some raw talent and some things that need to be addressed and worked on and doctored a little bit, but still unreal talent and a lot of praise for this kid if you look up some of his articles and previews on the internet. And one of the highest praises he receives, and one that I found the most intriguing, especially to areas of need for the Stars, is his ability to pose a threat on a breakaway for any team. There was a lot of praise with talks of him clearing the defensive zone, which if you watched any Dallas Stars game this past season, you know that was a huge issue that they had. They had trouble getting out of their own zone, and a lot of that sometimes had to do with winning or losing faceoffs. But then even if they could win a faceoff, the Stars just had trouble getting clean exits out of the defensive zone, and that sometimes made their play in the neutral zone disastrous, leading to many advantageous situations for the opposition. So Dallas could certainly use a guy, especially with this kind of size and speed. He still was 6'4", could be easy to believe that he moves slow, but a lot of draft scouts say that he can actually skate pretty well. And I think part of that is probably because he does weigh quite a bit less than some of these other defensemen that are above 6'3" that weigh over 200 pounds. But of course, you would want to see a guy like Pickering maybe add a little bit more weight as he gets to the NHL level, so he can really go toe to toe with some of those bigger forwards like your Matthew Tkachuks of the world. But clearing the defensive zone, massive. His ability to navigate the neutral zone has been marked as one of the best for some of these prospects going in the mid to late first round area of the draft. There is some red flags on his control with the puck. A lot of reports say that, several times throughout the game, he can commit several turnovers. So he'll go from moments where he'll deliver a sweet pass down the ice where he kind of splits some defenders or gets it right on the tape of his teammate. But there's other times where he just makes ill-advised decisions and moves the puck somewhere where it shouldn't be moved, or he moves it too early or a step too late. And that causes issues for him and the rest of his team and puts the opposition in a really great situation to score or have a really nice opportunity with a shot on net. So that's one thing to be concerned about, but also something that there is potential with, that he can sometimes make those really excellent passes and make those big plays for his team. It's just something that his decision making, which will just naturally come the longer he plays hockey. I mean, you see it with any sport. Young kids are going to take really ill-advised shots in basketball or throw a really bad pass in football, or stuff like that. It just happens when you're kids, and even when you get to the high school level, the college level, that's all part of developing, is just learning the kind of the IQ side of things, of smart decision making, and just kind of those intangible skills that come with time. And of course, good coaching can help with that as well. Just learning to control those abilities a little bit more. And I think that playmaking can certainly be something the Stars can look to use to their advantage, especially on the blue line. We've seen the benefits of having guys like Klingberg and Heiskanen on the blue line for the Stars as of late. Their ability to move the puck, pass the puck, or even shoot, even if it's not necessarily going to go in for them, it sets up another teammate for a tip in or a rebound opportunity. And this seems like something that Pickering can do very well. So he can play make with just about anybody else in this draft class, the way he's able to distribute the puck and generate offense. Also can skate with a good amount of speed. And just about every projection I've seen from Pickering has him going in the back half of round 1. So I think it's almost a lock that he will be available whenever the Stars pick at 18, unless something just absolutely out of left field happens on draft night. I think it's very realistic that he could be there. And he's a guy that I think would be a really interesting pick. I don't think this would be as much ever as a reach of a guy like Bichsel. I think that there's, at least from what I've read, Bichsel has a lot more raw talent that needs to be worked on, whereas Pickering has a little bit more of a grounded game with some things that still need to be worked out. and worked through with coaching and just development in general. But I think that he's a little bit more of a safer pick, but still a guy that even if he's going to be overlooked and be available late in the first round, the Stars have shown in the past that they can sometimes find that diamond in the rough late in the first round, even with the guy like Wyatt Johnston, who was picked in the middle of the first round last season, just had a fantastic season with the Windsor Spitfires. So be on the lookout for Owen Pickering, another name that you'll need to keep your eye on draft night. Curious to see where he falls and if he's available at pick number 18, if Jim Nill and company will pull the trigger on him. Coming up next, we will talk about our last prospect of the day, another defenseman born in the United States, Lian Hutson. More on him after another quick break. All right, time to talk about our last prospect of the day, Lian Hutson, born in Chicago, Illinois, a product of the United States Hockey National Team Development Program. He is a guy that is catching a lot of buzz to be maybe picked near the very end of the first round, but more than likely somewhere in the second round. So this is a guy that probably, obviously, I think that he will be very much available at number 18 for the Stars in the first round, but I don't think he's a guy that the Stars would use a first round pick on. But maybe if he's there in the second round when the Stars pick, he is a player that could get selected there. And the reason that he's not going to be picked in the first round, by my knowledge and by many other people's guesses as well, is his size. He is 5 foot 8 inches, 148 pounds. And that is definitely not an ideal size for an NHL hockey player. This is a guy that would not be seeing NHL time or really even AHL time for quite a few seasons. He's set to be playing for, I believe, Boston University in 2023-2024. So this is a guy that's still very much developing, growing. So he will continue to add weight and get bigger. You obviously can't control the height factor, but you can control the weight. And even so, we see plenty of smaller, undersized guys be successful in the league, even at the forward position, like Johnny Gaudreau. But even on the defensive side of things, Cale Makar is only 5'10". He is 187 pounds, though. So there is quite the difference there with weight. But again, Hutson could very well add weight while still in development, while in college playing for Boston, and could eventually get up to being the quote-unquote proper size to play in the NHL, where he's not just going to get absolutely bulldozed night in and night out by some massive forwards in the league. But despite his size, there is a lot to like about Hutson. He can still burn people with his finesse and speed. His coaches at the U.S. development team program have almost just nothing but good things to say about his speed, his IQ, the way he plays the game. Nick Four, one of the assistant coaches for the U.S. development program, just called him a unicorn because he can defend and generate offense through an excellent work ethic. So he can play both sides of the ice really well. Even maybe with a smaller defenseman, you think that he's a little bit more offensive minded, but in the looks of it, he can certainly get things going on offense. Again, a little bit more of a distributor and playmaker rather than a shooter, but that's still a really nice tool to have on the blue line. But even the head coach of the U.S. development team, Adam Nightingale, has to say about him that he's a good defender, and he's a good defender because he's interested in actually playing defense, which I think is monumental for any prospect, but especially a prospect with the measurements of a guy like Hutson with his size. I mean, he puts in the work. He's determined to being the best player he can be. And I imagine just being the size that he is, that he's probably grown up his whole life kind of with that chip on his shoulder to overcome the odds and still be a hard-working player, a hard-nosed player, despite him likely being the smallest player on the ice. And I think it's obviously paid off for him that he's even being talked about drafted in the second round of the NHL draft. I mean, absolutely no shame in being drafted at all in the NHL. I mean, just to get drafted is an incredible feat within itself. But even in the second round, that's pretty impressive given the amount of guys that try to make it to the league every single year. So I think this would be a really interesting prospect, potentially another kind of stretch and reach, which the Stars are no stranger to kind of making those picks. There were people that thought Johnston and Stankoven were reaches at their respective spots for the Stars last season, and now we've seen that they're the top-rated prospects within the Dallas Stars prospect pool. This is a little bit of a different situation. Johnston is even a smaller player, but he's definitely not as small as a guy like Hutson. But again, Hutson would still have plenty of time to grow, add muscle, put on weight, and get to being a little bit more of an appropriate size for an NHL defenseman. And so if the Stars get him, it would likely be after round one. Again, I don't anticipate this guy, because of his size, going any earlier than round 2. I think somewhere in the middle of round 2 is where he's projected to go by many people. And so we'll kind of see if he falls to a team, if another team kind of takes a chance on him and takes him early, because I think there's a lot of upside with his ability to play make and set up his teammates for success, but also just his knack for playing hard-nosed defense, whether that's getting up and crowding lanes, disrupting plays using his stick. He can do a little bit of everything, says his coach, Adam Nightingale, which is really high praise from a guy who's coaching some of the best United States young hockey players in the entire country. Super high praise for a guy that maybe on paper you might say, this is a guy the Stars should avoid, but I think that that's kind of what the Dallas Stars defensemen have always been about, at least as of late, is being, those really hard workers on defense that disrupt plays and make life difficult for opposing offenses. Even if they're really good offenses like your Colorados and your Calgarys of the world, you're going to have to work for every single goal that you score. And so if the Stars get him, it would probably be in round 2. So I'm interested to see where this kid falls. And even if it is in round 2, round 3, it's still something to potentially get excited about, because Dallas has had a great tendency to land some pretty nice players after round 1 in some of the past several drafts. Obviously, Logan Stankoven was taken in round 2 of last year's draft. Antonio Stranges in 2020 was taken in round 4. Riley Damiani was taken in round 5 in 2018. Jason Robertson and Jacob Peterson both taken in round 2 and 5 respectively in 2017. And then Rope Hintz was taken in round 2 of the 2015 draft. So still, it's easy to, kind of ignore the 2nd through 7th round of the NHL draft and say, these players might not amount to be very much, but that's always, not the case. Some of the best players in NHL history and even some of the best players in today's game were guys that were taken either in the middle of the draft or even at the very end of the draft. I think Joe Pavelski was taken in the 7th round back when he was drafted way back in the day, and he's had a fantastic storied career. So always never sleep on the late round picks, and especially 2nd, 3rd round. I think the Stars could go out and potentially get a guy that could, maybe not change the franchise or alter things totally, but could be an impact player in a few seasons from now. So always interesting with drafts like the ones of the NHL, just because you get all kinds of guys from literally all over the world. So sometimes it's hard to get a read on a person because they've been playing in Switzerland or they've been playing, even in Canada. Sometimes you just don't get the full scoop on a guy until you finally see him interacting with your team and with your organization. But that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Stars. Thank you guys again for making us your first listen of the day. If you're watching on YouTube, let me know in the comments down below if you would be interested in seeing the Stars draft any of these players, or if not these guys, who you would want Dallas to take with that 18th overall pick in the 1st round. Be sure to find and follow me on Twitter at Dane_Lewis and our show as well at Locked On Stars. But we'll be right back here tomorrow with another episode of potential picks that the Dallas Stars could make for the 2022 NHL Draft. We'll see you there, Stars fans. Have a great Wednesday.